Yes.
Good afternoon, Dr. Atul Munshi, chairperson of today's meeting, and Jignesh and uh, Anita. And I need to thank Dr. Jignesh for inviting me to speak on this topic. In the context, we are going to speak on phytoestrogens in the context of the menopausal patient. Now, this is a very challenging task, but it has been very fascinating for me. So let me move on. And as we talk about the practical approach to phytoestrogens, I need to just do a little bit of the groundwork. So as you all know that menopause, at that time, the ovaries stop producing any estrogen. So it's a hypoestrogenic state. Now, estrogen receptors are located throughout the female body. So, obviously, if it is a hypoestrogenic state, the effect of the lack of estrogens will be seen in the entire body. So, you could have things like vasomotor symptoms and symptoms of genitourinary system in menopause and dyspareunias, the effect on the connective tissues, the wrinkling of the skins, sleep disorders, psychological changes, effect on the bones, effect on the arteries and the coronary artery disease. So these are effects which are occurring in organs which are topographically very far apart. But since estrogen receptors are present in all these organs, all of these systems will show some kind of symptoms or disorders. So the patient is going to land up with specialists of different areas. Like they may go to an orthopedician, an endocrinologist, a gynecologist. All these people get involved in the management of menopause. But since we know that it is because of lack of estrogen, we have all the time felt that HRT or hormone replacement therapy, as it was known at one time, currently it is known as MHT. So we used to feel that this is the panacea for all problems of menopause, and this is exactly how it was. Till, of course, we all know what happened is that in 2002, the results of the Women's Health Initiative trial were released, and they said that the risks are much more than the benefits of the menopausal hormonal therapy. The results of this trial were further collaborated and confirmed by two very independent, very important meta-analyses, which every person should know about. It was the Nelson and the Humphrey meta-analysis. They actually quantified that risk and they added to what WHI said, and they said that there are different side effects or risks in the short term, use less than 5 years and use longer than 5 years. So they said there is an early harm and an increasing harm, and possibly this will keep continuing. So all the three harms are continuing with the MHT being used. They said quality of life, there is no cause for celebration. And because of microinfarcts, in fact, Alzheimer's disease and dementia may actually worsen. So, because of this, we had many recommendations, guidelines, which came for the United Services Preventive Task Force in 2002. Then we had in 2003. Then in 2004, 2007, we had from the International Menopause Society. I am not going into an analysis of whether WHI is good or not good. I'm not doing any rebuttal of all these charges. What we are coming to is the topic on hand. And what I want to start with is what are the indications, latest indications for MHT? And this is the position statement which I'm now projecting. This has been given by the North American Menopause Society 2017, and it is available in their official journal called Menopause. So according to this, just look, hormone therapy is the most effective therapy, but it is only indicated as of now for vasomotor symptoms and local therapy for genitourinary syndrome of menopause. It can also be used for the prevention of bone loss and in fractures in high risk populations, provided there are no contraindications to MHD, which translates as probably no excess risk of breast cancers or coronary vascular disease, and it should be within that critical window of opportunity. One sec, please. I'm just altering something. Yeah. So within that critical window of opportunity, which is within 10 years of the final menstrual period, or in the younger postmenopausal women, whichever is earlier. So these are the indications that are now with us. Now, why do we need alternatives to MHT? So, subsequent to the WHI trial, 80% of the Americans, they started seeking alternatives to their problems. And currently, there are about 25 to 36% of Americans still using them, and up to 50% in some ethnic communities still using alternatives to MHT. And this trend is continuing to increase. So why did this happen is that there was fear and anxiety about long-term effects of menopausal hormonal therapy. There was lack of knowledge among the population. And because so many years, see, from 2002 now to 2020, there is a lack of expertise among even young medical graduates. They don't know how to prescribe MHT, to whom to prescribe. They have no clue. These are very common. Alternatives are very common in ethnic groups. And most people currently are unwilling to medicalize menopause and consider menopause as a disease. So if it is a natural event, they are not very, very happy to medicalize it by using medicines. Then, of course, we have medical contraindications to the menopausal hormonal therapy. So whatever the reasons that there have been, but the interest in alternatives to MHT has been really, really great. So look at this slide. We have non-hormonal options for menopausal symptoms, which includes non-pharmacological options like lifestyle changes. Then you have pharmacotherapy, like you have SSRIs and SNRIs for different types of vasomotor symptoms and other symptoms. Then the third component is complementary and alternative medicine. The purview of my talk is not actually to research these. So this is not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at complementary and alternative medicine. Now, the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine has put all these into 5 main groups, as you can see here. Now, what I have highlighted here is this third group. What is the purview of my talk and the purview of my interest today? What I have looked at very pointedly and very deeply are phytoestrogens, this third group, a few herbal therapies, and homeopathy. At this point of time, I would encourage all of you to read up a lot of blogs as well as watch a lot of videos by rationalists like James Randi, Michael Shermer, and Carl Sagan. And all of these people, they believe that there is no logic in saying that the more you dilute a medicine, the more potent it becomes. So their belief is that there is absolutely no scientific basis for the use of homeopathy, and I am not going to touch this area. So this, for me and in my mind, it is very clear that this is not what we are looking at today. So then what exactly are phytoestrogens? So these are chemicals which are derived from plants, phyto, and they have estrogenic properties. These are actually diphenolic structures with a preferential binding with estrogen receptors, the beta ones more than the alpha ones. And they have different modes of action, like they can act as receptor modulators or enzyme modulators. So they have estrogen-like actions, and they have non-estrogen dependent actions, and they have non-hormonal actions as well. They could be plant constituents, of which roots are usually most concentrated, and you could have protein isolates or extracts which you can get available as pills, or they may be synthetic. So phytoestrogens have been divided into 3 main groups. There is a 4th group, but there are 3 main groups, of which isoflavones and lignans have been studied the most. Out of these, there are at least 1,000 known isoflavones, and of these, they have many metabolites. These metabolites have actions similar to isoflavones as well as independent actions. Now here I have put a metabolite of diazine. So this equal is actually produced in mammalian gut from the action of the gut microflora on didaziine. And this is a very potent antioxidant, and a lot of studies has been done on this. Why is it so important? Because many people do not have these bacteria which can actually produce E. coli in their bodies. So if in these people, if you were to give any soya product, it will not be as effective because they are not metabolizing the E. coli. So you have this category in literature which says equal producers and equal non-producers. So you will understand what this actually means. The Indian diets are a very, very rich source of phytoestrogens, which includes whole grains and lentils, and it includes nuts and seeds and legumes and beans and all kind of podded plants, as well as lot of herbs, lot of spices. Out of all of these, the one which has been studied the most, that is because, see, this is where the Western influence comes, and whereas India, we lack. So the maximum studies are there with soya. But if you have a look, what I've highlighted here is that Bengal gram, which in my part of the country, we call it Kabuli chana, the white one. This has almost 3 times more of isoflavone content than soya. But because it has not been studied as much, so most of the rest of my talk will refer to soya isoflavones. One very important thing that I want to draw your attention to is this sentence which I have put right at the top. I need you to understand this sentence. This says that there are phytoestrogenic foods. Yes, there are all these are foods. You're consuming them daily as food. You're consuming the whole grains and the lentils and all these. And then there are dietary herbs. So you have dietary herbs like turmeric and ginger. So these also you're using as diet. They are herbs used as diet. And the third category is herbal medicine. This is what is very important. These 3 categories in your mind should be very clear, because herbal medicine is medicine. They have very potent effects. And whatever you say about phytoestrogenic foods, don't translate it and say that it is equal and it means the same when you are talking about herbal medicine. So this was the point. And the Indian curry, it has a great amalgam of all these dietary phytoestrogens, herbs, and spices. And there are many dietary phytoestrogens as well as medicinal herbs which have been studied. I have listed here the ones which we are familiar with in India: Ashoka, Yashtimuta, and Ashwagandha, Brahmi, Shatavari. And then there are some which are not very familiar to us, but they have been used in the West and in other indigenous cultures. So a lot of these have been studied. There is no doubt about it. But a lot of them have not been studied also. They do have some effects and they have been licensed. See, most of the research on these has been done in Germany. So they have licensed many of these herbs. But in USA, they are not licensed as drugs. All of them. They are licensed only as health foods. The difference is that the regulations change. Naturally, you will have different regulation for drugs. You will have different regulation for foods. So the question which I want to ask is, are phytoestrogens effective as alternatives to MHT? Now look, I have gone and listed all these difficulties to answer this question. How can I answer this question? Or how can the research actually answer this question for you? See, there are differences in the preparation of foods. I'll give you an example. Now you have soya. Not many people know that the soya bean has to be soaked overnight. Then the water has to be thrown, then it has to be boiled in the morning, the water has to be thrown. Then you want to cook it as a dal or a lentil, you cook, or you want to powder it, then you dry and powder it. It has a process. So many people do not do that process. And if you don't do that process, it is not available for humans. And soya used as such has got at least 4 or 5 ingredients which cause gastric disturbances and flatulence. It is indigestible. So there is a difference in the preparation of the foods. Then there are species differences, the differences in soil, geographical, environmental difference. All of these differences are going to change the constituents of that soya bean. That's right, no? So then there will be variations in plasma levels. So the content of the isoflavones will change. The absorption patterns are different. Bioavailability is different. I already talked about equal producers and non-producers. And you will see that Asians, 60% of them are equal producers. Westerners are not. So anything that you're going to investigate will show different results in different communities. Then there are certain research limitations. We do not have standard protocols, doses, durations, outcomes. The numbers of these studies are so small, the durations are small, and each type of food that you will try and assess will have different constituents. So it's a big lot of things to look at. Further, look at this. See, we know that placebo effect is there in 20 to 30% of the patients. You give them a placebo, their vasomotor flushes, hot flushes will decrease. So how will you separate that placebo effect from whatever you're giving them? That is a difficulty. So despite all these difficulties, it has been a little bit of effort. I've tried to get all the data that I could, get all the guidelines and recommendations that I could, and try and get a gist, because we have to work, we have to move forward with something. So it's something like this. I will say that half the research is saying yes, and it's going left, and half the research is saying no, don't use, it's going right, and the rest are coming behind me. So can you see the chaos? Despite that, we do have certain guidelines which I picked up from recommendations and a lot of other data, meta-analysis, systematic analysis, and they say that phytoestrogens do improve vasomotor flushes more than placebo. So that's a good thing, but less than estrogen. It cannot replace the estrogen. They do improve vaginal dryness, but there is no change in the maturation index or the incontinence or the pH, and probably no change in sexual dysfunction. Probably no benefit to cognition. Now, all this lack of consistent conclusions is not because there is lack of clinical correlation, but it is because there is lack of proper research. So what we need is larger studies to confirm what I have put on this slide. But so far, the current information is as it says here. Now let's go to the next, the cardiovascular system. Now, most of the problems of the cardiovascular system are because of metabolic syndrome. So I'm looking at that. We all know that triglycerides, total cholesterol, LDL all increase, HDL decreases. This is the menopausal metabolic syndrome. What do phytoestrogens do? Their effect on the lipids is insignificant, but they improve arterial compliance. They decrease systolic blood pressure. So what we must remember is that when we talk of lipids and this, we are actually talking of surrogate markers. These are surrogate markers. If there is a change in these markers, they are not the clinical endpoint. The clinical endpoint is death from heart attack. That is a clinical endpoint. So we are using surrogate markers to try and get an understanding of what is happening. So there is a statement which has been said, in fact, by several people, that the benefit on the cardiovascular system is minimal at best. What happens to the bones? Now, the North American Menopause Society, the soya isoflavone report of 2011, it says clearly, no compelling evidence of benefit of phytoestrogens on bones. But then there is another analysis in the later one, 2019. So every time there is something which is changing. So I'm talking about what has been told to us in 2019. So this report says that since it predominantly acts on the beta estrogen receptors, and beta estrogen receptors are in the lumbar spine compared to the hip. So phytoestrogens do decrease the loss of bone in the lumbar spine. but longer studies are needed. So there is always a but. Whenever they're saying anything nice, they are putting a but. Now, these two, I'll go back to this. I would recommend that all of you actually go through this report by the NAMS and Shen et al. In Nutrients 2019. And I'm just going to actually show you. I don't expect you to read this because this is just a screenshot. I just put it to show you that this was a systematic review of 68 full-length articles and 95 abstracts. So I thought this was a very valuable thing, and with a lot of summaries and opinions given, this is a good one. So if you want to actually look at the end result of all these maddening research, you could look at this one. And here it is, we are talking of the cardiovascular system and the metabolic syndrome, and another one on urogenital tract and cognition. So I have highlighted this, but I don't expect you to read it because we've already given you a summary of what is isoflavones. Now let us give a moment to look at the summary of clinical data for herbs. Now, as I said, I already showed you a long list of herbs in a previous slide, which are used as dietary herbs as well as herbal medicine. So I'm not going through each one of them because that you will not assimilate the whole thing. What I need to point out to you that I have picked up a few, some of them. For example, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I delivered a talk on phytoestrogens, at that time I did mention that red clover is one of the most potent anti-cancer agents, but I didn't find that evidence now. So I'm not mentioning it. So the research keeps changing, but all of these have been used for something or the other. Like St. John's wort has been used for depression. Ashwagandha has been used for so many things. But the only evidence that we have is of it as an anti-stress or an adaptogen. And it has been used for obsessive compulsive disorders, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, Parkinson's disease, for, innumerable, but there is insufficient evidence for everything, all of that, except as a stress buster. Very powerful statement by the NICE guidelines of 2015. They say that herbal remedies which are not regulated by a medicine authority should not be considered safe. So this was a very beautiful thing and good to know all these things. So when we talk about safety, then I'm wondering that we are always talking about estrogen sensitive cancers and estrogen. Why not talk about phytoestrogens and cancer and look at the data that we have regarding this particular topic? So the thing is that cancer can be prevented by phytoestrogens is suggested, only suggested, by the fact that Asians who consume a lot of soya have lower cancer rates. And it is supported by some circumstantial evidence which says that those people who have high cancer rates, they have lower metabolites of phytoestrogens in their urine, which means that they're not consuming enough phytoestrogens, so they have more cancer rates. So that it is prevents cancer, it is supported but not actually proven. Now, 10-15 years back, I had mentioned that phytoestrogens cause proliferation of the breast cells in vitro. This time, what I found was that it does cause proliferation of the breast cells in vitro, but this is mediated now. We know about the receptors now. So this is mediated by the alpha receptors. And whatever is being done by the alpha is reversed by the beta receptors. And we know that phytoestrogens are beta receptor people. So we are saying that yes, it can prevent cancer because when it mediates via beta cells, it decreases cell proliferation. Further, it is possible that phytoestrogens prevent the initiation of cancer, the beginning of the cancer, but it cannot inhibit a cancer which has already come. This is because consumption of phytoestrogens in early life has been known to be cancer preventive, but it doesn't protect you from cancer if you start consuming in late life. What about cancer risk, cancer patients, high risk patients or survivors? there are a few reports which I found which said, yeah, they are protective, but we are not very sure. But definitely, when you're using phytoestrogens in the short term, it is not causing proliferation of the or hyperplasia of the endometrial cells. Excuse me.
Dr. Nirja, we'll have to wind up in another 5 to 7 minutes because we already.
Okay, so colon cancer, it is probably protective, but because of the high fiber content and because it is acting on the metabolic syndrome. So side effects are usually well tolerated, but herbal medicines can have very serious side effects. So it's very important that you inquire whether they are taking it, because people don't tell, counsel them and caution them, especially before surgery, and tell them that they interact. So are they safe? Probably herbal medicine has powerful effects, but we have a long history of safety in Asians. But that you cannot use to extrapolate that if you take long durations and increased intake, it will be equally safe. The words natural, herbal, standardized, uniform, all of these are a little misleading because people tend to overdose on anything which they perceive as natural. Rigid testing is not mandatory because they are not drugs and they're not regulated by drug enforcing authorities. Soya fortified foods, it is important to read the label. But remember, it's pertinent to say that there's no regulation to ensure the content which they say. So what is the difference between these three? The diet, the isolates and the isoflavone pills, they're all metabolized differently. Estrogen is the most potent, but isoflavones have 10,000 times more concentration, and just by sheer abundance, its binding potency increases. Their mechanisms, Dr. Patki will talk about estrogen dependent, non-estrogen dependent, as well as non-hormonal. Synthetic isoflavones are better than soya for hot flushes, and soya diet is difficult to consume. You cannot go in excess. Benefits include the fibers and the vitamins and the MUFA and the PUFA. So it would be very simplistic to say that if you adopt a diet of, say, Japan, you can have the same health benefits, because any disease or health is due to many influences as well as the genetic makeup. And further, you need to be exposed to these foods from infancy, not later on in life. Can you prescribe phytoestrogens as therapy? The dose and the form it determines the safety. For example, peppermint tea is safe, but tinctures and oils are concentrated and you should use them with caution. So there is the NAM's position statement of 2015, as well as NICE guidelines, which say do not recommend at this time till longer, better studies are available. But a more reasonable approach has been taken by this older NAM's report, which said that when patients are suffering and you are not able to give them MHD, then you start them on high doses, give them for 12 weeks, monitor for side effects, but best benefit is just like estrogens in early menopause or within 10 years of the last final menstrual period. So this is my final slide. What is the most prudent advice that you can give? That isoflavones are reasonably safe in women for mild to moderate vasomotor symptoms. And for those women who either will not or cannot take MHD, but you should counsel them about the lack of clear evidence about the effects and about certain uncertainty about some side effects. And you must remember, this is very important, that 70%, this is an actual study, they found that 70% of the women are satisfied if the vasomotor symptoms are decreased even by 50%. So there comes the role of phytoestrogens. Modest intake is beneficial, and you can take the foods as we are taking, but when you take herbs, take them in small amounts, but the herbal medicine should be rare and limited quantity. The most prudent advice is to take a nourishing, locally available, seasonally relevant diet. This is going to provide isoflavones in good content for Asians, but very low content for Westerners. The US FDA has said that you can give 45 to 50 milligrams per day of isoflavones to symptomatic postmenopausal women. And must remember that any of these products, if you're using fermented products, they are rich, more rich than processed products. So 75 milligrams of isoflavones, you will require 300 grams of soya milk, but only 180 grams of tofu. And if you have to give, say, about 50 milligrams of isoflavones, you could tell them to take half a cup of cooked soya beans daily or one capsule. So in this way, they will be able to get their content. So that is all I have to say. Thank you all for a very patient hearing.